Good morning. Oops. Got to turn on my cheat sheet here. Well, good morning, everybody. Pleased to see you this morning. So, got a lot of ground to cover, so let's go ahead and dive right into it. You know that we've been studying the life of Joseph. Matter of fact, this is the last of those lessons. And just by quick way of review, you know, God's been brought Joseph through betrayal of his brothers, slavery, prison, and he's blessed him as the number 2 man in Egypt. And after a time of testing, Joseph turns around and blesses his family when they moved to Egypt. And then last week we talked about he blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, giving them a portion of his inheritance, adopting them as his own sons for purposes of inheritance. And for this last lesson, I think it's particularly appropriate in the stuff we're going to be studying today to reemphasize that this story of Joseph is about the fulfillment of God's promise. We're going to see in the wrap-up, today's focus is on the blessing of Joseph. Too loud? Yeah, too loud, guys. The blessing of Joseph in, let me back up, blessing of Jacob to the rest of his sons. And you'll see the prophetical nature of that, and really points to this, the blessing of God in fulfilling what he said he was going to do, but he's using Joseph to do that in the process. Still too loud, or is it okay? Okay? Okay, so we're going to read through chapter 49. We'll talk about 49, and then we'll go. Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water. You shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his borders shall be at Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely, yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph, and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with the blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. So the chapter is dominated by the blessing of his sons. And this, verse 28 calls it blessings, but really, a lot of these seem more like a curse, frankly, in the way he speaks. And in fact, it turns out that the word that's used here, barak, in Hebrew, it mostly means the most frequent use is blessing, but it can also be used in a curse. And I got to tell you, when I was doing this study, and I'm not making a political statement at all, but I just had to chuckle to myself that barak can both be a blessing and a curse. I just thought that was too funny, So, anyway, but it can mean both. And you see that in the book of Job. The same word is used here, same word, but it's used in two different contexts. This is Satan speaking to God. Have you not put a hedge around him? Speaking of Job, have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed, you have barak, the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all he has, and he will curse you, he will barak you to your face. Again, it's the same word. And I don't know if it's the Hebrew equivalent of air quotes that he will bless you or how that works, but basically that's how it would work today. And that's what we see when we go through here. There's actually a combination of blessings and curses. So we're going to spend, frankly, most of the lesson looking at this and looking how he uses past events of his sons to prophecy about the future. And while some of these seem pointed at the individual son, you son will do this, mostly he's projecting far beyond. He's projecting into the future, talking about what the tribe is going to be like. We'll compare, not for every one of these, but for some of these, over in Deuteronomy chapter 33, Moses blesses each of the sons of Israel. And we'll do some comparison in that. And I hope this map shows up, because I'm going to be referring to this map time and time and time again in this lesson. Now, this is a map of Israel by tribe, and if you can't make out all the gory details, you may have a version in the back of your own Bible. I don't know, but this is the land. When they go to conquer it, they drew their lots. This is the land that they were assigned. It doesn't necessarily mean the land that they took, as you'll see as we go through this, but it's the lands that they were assigned as Joshua leads them into the promised land. So we'll be referring to that. And just by the way, incidentally, it's only a small fraction of the promised land. If you look in Genesis 15 and a couple other places, God describes that the promised land was all the way from the Nile to the Euphrates, a vast area. And even in its heyday, Israel maybe takes 25% of that area. So all that we're going to see today is in the promised land, but we just tend to concentrate just in a little corner of it, frankly. So let's start with Reuben. And it starts out as a blessing. My firstborn, my might, you're preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power, but you're unstable, and therefore you will not have preeminence. This refers back to an incident, and we don't have a lot of detail about it. It's really just this one verse back in Genesis 35, While Israel lived in the land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah. That's, if I remember right, that's Rachel's concubine. Went and slept with her. And Israel heard about it, and man, that had huge repercussions for Reuben in years to come, and his father's trust of him. And you see it in the tribe of Reuben. When the Israelites come into the promised land, they approach it from the southeast. They sweep in across the land from the southeast, and they cross the Jordan between the Dead Sea and the Galilee. Reuben, along with Gad and Manasseh, decided to pick land on the east side of the Jordan River. Reuben and the others, they saw that it was a fine grazing land, and so they asked, hey, this seems like great land, we'll take it. Now, over time, however, the tribe of Reuben suffers from this choice, because just look at it in kind of a strategic position. They're surrounded by enemies, the Ammonites, Moabites, Edomites, and they're physically, geographically separated from the strength of Israel. So they suffer from that for years and years and years to come. Their isolation also reflects their relationship to the other tribes. In the time of Deborah, the judge, which is just a few hundred years later, when Deborah goes to war, Reuben makes the decision to sit it out. You know, we're fine. You guys go. We're going to hang out here on our side of the river. So they isolate themselves, and you see the prophecy coming to bear about you're unstable. You'll not have preeminence. You specifically, Reuben, nor your tribe will you have preeminence. When you go to Simeon and Levi, again, clearly a curse. There's nothing positive in any of these statements that Jacob's making about them. They're violent, they're angry, they're vengeful. And it's seemingly, although Jacob doesn't spell it out, this seems to point back to an event that happened in Genesis chapter 34. And in that chapter, Jacob buys land, and apparently he makes some kind of covenant, a covenant with the Canaanite people living in Shechem. But the young ruler there rapes his daughter. The young ruler goes on wanting to marry her, but nevertheless he raped his daughter. Simeon and Levi, they approach the men of the city, the entire city. Again, it's the ruler, and they say, look, here's the deal. You can marry her, but every one of the men in the city is going to have to be circumcised. Every one of you. And then, if you do that, then you can marry the girl. And then it describes, on the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field. All their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have made trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. But they said, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? So this event sticks in Jacob's craw that they were so violent. Again, seemingly, the Scripture doesn't come out and say that, but apparently he made some kind of peaceful covenant with the people in Shechem. And not only did they use this underhanded trick to destroy the city, they violated the covenant, apparently. So that is the basis of Israel's curse. And when you see it played out in the tribes, again, he uses what has happened, the past experiences of the son, to project prophecy upon the tribes. And Simeon, they become part of the territory of Judah. Their allotment is right in the middle of Judah. What does that mean? The more numerous Judah, they kind of get absorbed. For all practical purposes, they get They lose their identity. And in fact, when I mentioned in chapter 33 of Deuteronomy that Moses blesses each of the sons of Israel, he leaves out Simeon. He leaves them out. And even by that time, apparently, they'd kind of become somewhat insignificant. And that's even before they enter into the promised land. So, if you look at the other son, Levi, we're going to look at some verses here that Levi gets separated out as the priestly tribe. So they have no allotment. If you can see the little stars, and I don't know if you can, but those are 6 stars there, but there's a total of 48 cities that the Levites are assigned, which is scattered all throughout Israel. So you see the fulfillment of Jacob's promise. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Both sons, one gets diluted, one gets scattered. And in the complete, pretty amazing actually, fulfillment of the prophecy that's given there. If you look over in Moses' blessing, now Moses from the tribe of Levi, and when he gives his blessing, it's a pretty lengthy blessing. But he does talk about this new role of the Levites. Yes, they're dispersed throughout all of Israel, but he talks about their new role as God's chosen tribe to serve as his priests. And he refers to an event when he says down here, who said of his father and mother, I regard them not. He disowned his brothers and ignored his children, for they observed your word and kept your covenant. What Moses is speaking of is when the tribe of Levi came to his aid, when all of Israel was heading down the path of worshiping the golden calf. The tribe of Levi drew swords and they put a stop to it, and regardless of who they went up against, family, fellow tribesmen, whatever. And Moses credits them for that. He goes on to say, Levi shall teach Jacob your rules and Israel your law. They will put incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. And that's what they go on to become. We talked quite a bit about Judah last week, so I just want to emphasize a couple things here. Again, your father's sons will bow down for you. It projects, this is the first blessing that's genuinely a blessing, right? He blesses him with rule and authority. There's no indication that the man, Judah, ever had any rule or authority or anything like that, but so clearly he's pointing to the tribe, which is ultimately going to be fulfilled in David and then ultimately in Christ. We talked about this last week. But it presents this picture of strength and power and authority in the tribe of Judah. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes. Some of your Bibles may say until Shiloh comes, and it's a bit, the wording is a bit vague there about what's being described, but in this translation they say until tribute comes. I want to talk about this aspect of it. He says, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. Highly poetic, but what does it mean? Well, he's making descriptions about the wealth and the extent of riches that are going to be found under Judah. You don't tie a pack animal to a choice grapevine. They're going to tear it up, they're going to eat it. You don't do that. But what he's describing is we're going to have so much choice vines that, who cares? We'll go ahead and tie this donkey up to this one. That's what he's describing. When he's talking about washing his garments in wine, again, it's just a poetic way of talking about we got so much wine we don't even need to worry about it. We're going to bathe in this stuff. Likewise, talking about the eyes being darker than wine and teeth whiter than milk, it's just a poetic way of describing the riches and the wealth that's going to come upon Israel through Judah. That's all that they're doing. Judah's land, they're given a extensive land. Matter of fact, we already talked about Simeon, how theirs was carved out, and the explanation was really it's too big for Judah, so they gave a little slot of it to Simeon. But in Judah there, they're assigned this part. Now, I want you to, all I did is shrink that. What I want you to see is in comparison, the maximum, so these are on the same scale now, right? The little map on the lower left, the big map on the lower right shows the extent that Israel grows under Judah, under David and Solomon, to its maximum size. It basically doubles the amount of territory under Judah, and under those kings, really it reaches its maximum extent, fulfilling the prophecy of what Jacob was talking about just a fabulous time for the nation of Israel. And then this is from David. The Lord God of Israel chose me from all my father's house to be king over Israel forever. For he chose Judah as leader. And in the house of Judah, my father's house, and among my father's sons, he took pleasure in me to make me king over all Israel. And of all my sons, for the Lord's given me many sons, he's chosen Solomon, my son, to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. He said to me, it is Solomon your son who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. I will establish his kingdom forever if he continues strong in keeping my commandments and my rules as he is today. Again, just speaks of God's ongoing plan and of Jacob's prophecy that Judah would be the preeminent of the tribes. Let's look at Zebulun and Issachar. Frankly, two brothers I didn't know very much about until I went into this study. If you look at the description, Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall be a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, and the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant at forced labor. So what you see in Zebulun is a blessing. Issachar, it's kind of a mix. There's a blessing, but there's also this curse about becoming a servant at forced labor. And there's the implication in there that the resting place was good. There's the implication that maybe he enjoyed his rest a little too much. By the way, another thing that's a little bit interesting about this, up till now, the sequence has been oldest to youngest, dealing with Leah's sons, oldest to youngest. But here they go out of order. Here Jacob goes out of order. He puts Zebulun in front of his older brother Issachar. Seemingly, yet another, no explanation given, by the way, but seemingly yet another indication, along with kind of reading between the lines in the prophecy here, that Zebulun is going to have more success than his older brother Issachar. And you see that in the tribes. Over in Moses' blessing, it's even more apparent. He says, rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar in your tents. Well, what's that mean? It's consistent with what we learn about the tribes, that Zebulun was very active, very energetic. Issachar, not so much. They kind of enjoyed their resting place to the point, and they kind of enjoyed, a little relaxing of the hands, to the point where they apparently became subject to slavery themselves. It does talk about both of them, again, being associated with the seas. In the description of Zebulun, you do see a very active tribe. And the judges Deborah and Gideon, both of them, Zebulun sends a large number of armies to help support him. And in Deborah, this is in her victory song, it says, Zebulun is a people who risk their lives to the point of death. And in David's time, when he's trying to consolidate his kingdom, Zebulun sends 50,000 seasoned troops, and it describes them with single-mindedness of purpose. So again, it points to Zebulun being a player, that they're active, they're vibrant, they're working in Israel to do what's right. Issachar, not so much. In Issachar, they get mentioned with Deborah, but they only get mentioned up at the front and that they offered some men to help, but then in the victory song they're completely left out. So how much did they help? I don't know. When you get down to David, the same line where Zebulun contributes 50,000 soldiers, Issachar provides 200. So, I mean, they're raw. They're just not active. In the time of Gideon here, it talks about that Gideon is going up against the check my notes here. Yes, the Midianites. And they apparently, if you read through the text, it's the Midianites are crossing the land of Issachar. But there's no mention that Issachar provides any help in defending their land. Matter of fact, when Gideon calls for help, he doesn't even bother sending a note to Issachar. So it just paints a picture of a kind of a sleepy, laid back, sure, we'll let you run over us, no problem, kind of tribe. Completely different from Zebulun. So I learned personally quite a bit about digging in these two guys. One thing that's kind of interesting here, the blessing was Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. But if you look at the map, they're not on the sea, which makes for a little bit of a head scratcher. They are, however, them and Issachar, they're on the river Kishon, which is apparently a substantial enough river that there's a decent amount of river commerce that heads out the Mediterranean and trades with others. So in that sense, they do have good access to the sea, but it's a little puzzling because they're not on the sea. And then we get to Dan. Dan's an interesting one because it talks about, first of all, Dan's name means judge, or it means vindicate. Rachel, when she couldn't have children, she let her handmaiden Bilhah have children for her. And when the firstborn was Dan, and Rachel names it, says, I'm vindicated, I am damned. So that's where the name comes from. Doesn't really explain, however, why Jacob is invoking that here, that word play here, because there's no indication in any way that Dan judges all the nation of Israel. The closest you get is Samson. Samson was a member of the tribe of Dan. So he's the closest that you get, but really that only affects just a few tribes, just a small area of Israel. It describes him as a serpent in the way, a viper in the path, that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backwards. That doesn't seem very positive. And what you see in the lineage of Dan is it's not very positive. It describes in Judges, it leads with this verse, and this verse, in those days there was no king in Israel. If you see that in the book of Judges, you know craziness is about to happen, or has just happened, and that's what's going on here with Dan. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the people of Dan was seeking for in itself an inheritance to dwell in. For until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. Well, that's maybe a little misleading because they did have allotments. They had an area assigned to them, but they were unable to take it. And so they go seeking a place that they're unable to conquer it. So they go seeking a place that they can. And they ultimately settle up at the north end of Israel. And they attack this town called Laish. And once they defeat it, they rename it Dan. So when you read they talk about the length of Israel, they talk from Dan to Beersheba, from the north to the south, even though Dan was assigned squarely in the middle. And let's read what happens in their attack to Laish here, and you'll see why they're considered a serpent in the way. In the book of Judges, it says, the people of Dan took what Micah had made. He'd made some idols, and the priest who belonged to him, and they came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. As far as I'm aware, in the book of Judges, this is unique in offering some sympathetic type of verbiage to describe the people of a Canaanite community. They were a people quiet and unsuspecting, and it comes across that the writer in no way approves of the way Dan went about this. They were, again, they're a snake. They're a snake in the grass, a viper that's striking at. The part about the horse that strikes at the horse's heels so that the rider gets kicked off, I'm paraphrasing that. What you also find is the people of Dan, they took these images of Michael and they set up graven images, idols for themselves, and they also set up a false priesthood. They took this fake priest that was hanging out with Micah, and they haul him up and they set him up as their priest, and they set up these idols as their priest. And so, verse 31, they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. So for years and years and years, Dan engages in idol worship, and the first wholesale tribe to do so. Again, kicking they're a snake. Their own actions have kicked them from the horse, so to speak. Years later, when Jeroboam comes to power, and he makes 2 golden calves for purposes of worship, so that people don't go to the kingdom of Judah, but instead hang around in his own kingdom. And where does he put these golden calves? Well, he puts one in Bethel, he puts the other one in Dan. So they become highly associated with idol worship. And it becomes a real curse to them. Quickly look at Gad, Asher, and Naphtali. They're both, every one of these is pretty brief. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Well, this whole raiders thing associated with Gad, again, that's another play on words. In Hebrew, Gad and raid they're only a vowel apart, very similar. So Jacob's making a play on words, 3 quick references to raiding, and then Gad, which rhymes with raid. You can see their choice of homeland. Again, they chose on the east side of the Jordan, and they're fairly exposed as well. Not as much as Reuben, but they're pretty well exposed to outside tribes. So it's not hard to see that they're going to be the subject of raiders throughout their history, and that's what you find. By the way, when we talk about Gad and Manasseh too, they occupy the mountainous country that's called Gilead. And so you'll often in the scripture see Gilead or Gileadites. It's referring to one of them because that's the region that they're inhabiting. Asher, it talks about their food shall be rich and she shall yield royal delicacies. Well, that sounds okay, I think, maybe, possibly. Again, they're along the coast. They become associated with commerce with the Canaanite villages. As a matter of fact, this area up here, Tyre in the very north, even at the pinnacle of Israel's power, they never conquer that area. So Asher never does take. Matter of fact, in Judges chapter 1, it describes Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Acco, that's a coastal town, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or Aleb, or Ashzib, or Helba, or Aphek, or Rehob. Well, I'm going to need to relax my jaw after that. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Most of the other tribes, it talks about they at least, if they didn't drive them out, they submitted them, made them become slaves, forced labor. But in Asher, it doesn't even say that, so they just kind of intermingled. And so this idea of royal delicacies apparently becomes a bit of a trap for them. And finally, in Naphtali, Naphtali is kind of similar to Zebulun in that they actually are very prominent and very active, playing in Israel, in the affairs of Israel, providing troops, jumping in when needed. The blessing, it's a little bit of a head scratcher. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. That's a little too poetic for me to follow what he's talking about, to be really honest. And I know the experts have struggled to understand what exactly he's pointing to anyway, but we do know that Naphtali has a similar reputation of Zebulun. They supported Gideon, they supported Deborah, and ultimately they supported David when David's trying to consolidate the kingdom. Okay, let's talk about Joseph We talked about the sons of Joseph last week. That was a specific blessing that Israel gives to his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. But here he's giving a blessing to Joseph. And by the way, the blessings of Joseph and Judah, those are the longest. Those are the most substantial in Jacob's account here. Joseph is a fruitful bough by the spring. His branches run over the wall. What is that speaking of? If you've ever been much of a gardener, you know that vines and stuff like that, man, you can't hardly stop those things. And that's the picture that's being painted of Joseph. Archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, harassed him, yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. And if you come away with nothing other in this study of Joseph, other than that he relied and stayed firm to God, please walk away with that, because that's what Jacob is saying. Harassed along the way, his brothers betrayed him. He had all sorts of difficulty, yet he remained firm, and he couldn't be stopped. That's the picture that he's painting. And then he talks about the blessings of the breast and the womb, that may you be blessed with many numbers, is basically what he's saying, by many descendants, and he does, both through Ephraim and Manasseh. We'll look at a verse in just a second that talks about that. And finally, may all these blessings be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from the brothers. So again, Joseph, and once in a while in Scripture you'll read about the tribe of Joseph. Mostly that points to Ephraim, but it can also include Manasseh when you're reading that in the text. In Deuteronomy, this is Moses' blessing, and he describes Joseph as a firstborn bull. Well, what does that mental picture does that create? He's awarded the firstborn, but he's also powerful and strong, and he's gonna be in charge, just like a powerful bull will. With his horns, he shall gore the peoples, all of them, to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim and the thousands of Manasseh. And even in that blessing, you see by the time of Moses, Ephraim has mushroomed. Manasseh has grown, but not to the same extent that Ephraim has. And again, Ephraim is the one that goes on to, along with Judah, to preeminence in the history of Israel. The tribe of Ephraim, they took kind of in the very heart of the kingdom, right alongside with Benjamin and Judah. That's in the very heart of the kingdom. And what you find in Scripture, excuse me, is they're very aggressive people. They get really upset on two occasions. One is with Gideon and another one with Jephthah, when they're going to battle against those that are tormenting Israel, Ammonites and the Midianites, if I remember right. And they get upset because they feel that they were left out. And they get so upset with Jephthah, as a matter of fact, they go to war. Jephthah is over with the tribe of Gad across the Jordan River there to the east. And they get so upset about this idea of being left out that they decide to go to war against their brother tribe. They get their tails kicked, but they go to war nevertheless, right? So they're really aggressive, and that aggressiveness comes through in their preeminence of Israel. And then if you look at Manasseh, what's up with Manasseh? Large swaths of land, but they split themselves. And they're already not a very large tribe numerically, and they split themselves over two large, sparsely populated areas. And in the course of this, they just kind of lose significance. They just don't have the same degree of significance that their brother Ephraim does. One of the interesting things here, if you read in Joshua chapter 17, is one of Manasseh's sons failed to have sons of his own. He only had daughters. And so the daughters come to Moses and say, hey, it's not right that our fathers should be left out of the inheritance. Give us some land. And they stand up for themselves. And Moses goes to God. God says, you know what? They're right. And accordingly, it's the daughters of this man. He's got a 48-syllable name. I can't remember it. But over in the western part of Manasseh, that's where they take part of their inheritance, these daughters. And finally in Benjamin. And really this is so incongruous. If you've been with us for the duration of this lesson, what's all the conversation been about Benjamin? Oh, little baby Benjamin, he's a nice boy, that Benjamin. And the brothers protect him, the dad protects him, everybody's protecting poor little Benjamin. And here, Jacob describes him as a ravenous wolf. And it's like, whoa, where'd that come from? And you don't see any indication of this in the man Benjamin, but in the tribe of Benjamin. They had a reputation as being really warlike, really fierce warriors. They didn't have large numbers. We'll talk about that in just a second, but they're known as fierce warriors. In this passage I have shown up here, talked about that they're very capable with the sling and with the bow. Matter of fact, there's another passage that talks about with either hand they could use a sling and they'd split a hair on your head, type of guys. Very capable warriors. Interesting interplay that's going on here also. They've got, in this passage, they're willing to turn against their fellow Benjamite Saul in favor of David. But earlier in their time, during the time of the judges, there's a very odd event where all the nation of Israel wants to punish one of the towns in Benjamin, and rightly so, because they did a heinous act. But Benjamin takes up for this town to the point of going to war, and initially they're fierce warriors, and initially they come out on top, but ultimately the tribe almost gets exterminated. So interesting history there in Benjamin, but they really fierce peoples. Again, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. You don't see it in the man, but you see it fulfilled in the later actions. So the rest of this lesson, I'm going to go into chapter 50. But before I do, I just want, what's the point in all this? What do we gain? I mean, it's all interesting, learning about the tribes of Israel and the prophecy and stuff like that. I guess what I've come away with learning about these prophecy of Jacob and the meaning of it is really just astounded at, and it reinforces the hand of God that He's playing throughout the lives of these people. That God's hand is directing all of these events. Or He's either directing or He's certainly aware, and it comes through in the prophecy. And okay, I can't use this so much in my walk, and maybe in my decisions, what I'm going to do for the day, but it does just reinforce the idea that we serve an all-powerful, all-knowing God that is always at work, always sees what's ahead. So that was helpful to me. We're going to look now into chapter 50, and this is going to be quick because I'm just about out of time. But it focuses on the burial of Jacob and ultimately on the death of Joseph. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ear of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, I'm about to die. In my tomb that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there shall you bury me. Now, therefore, let me please go up and bury my father, then I will return." And Pharaoh answered, "Go up and bury your father, as he has made you swear." So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a great and grievous lamentation, And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. When the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians." Therefore, the place was named Abel Mizraim. It is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them, for his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah to the east of Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite, possessed as a burying place. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, 'Please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.'" Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. Do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And thus ends Genesis chapter 50. Really, I just wanted to close the story with, when you go into the book of Exodus, as the people of Israel are freed by Moses, Moses honors Joseph's request. He took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, "God will surely visit you," which he did. Whoops, where'd that go? "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here." And they did. Moses, this is even 400 years later, they remember the promise that Joseph had made the brothers swear. And finally, in the book of Joshua, as for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried them at Shechem, in the piece of land that Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. So this land Shechem, same land, by the way, that Simeon and Levi, that came in and killed everybody, all the males anyway. That's where they bury Joseph. It's in the land no, it's not. It's in Manasseh. It's in the land of Manasseh, his oldest son. And that, to me, this is a fitting close of this whole story, because in this, at the end of Joshua, God is bringing his people back into the promised land, and he's fulfilled his process. He's fulfilled his promise. He's made their descendants into millions of them. There's millions of these as sons of Abraham now that are coming back in. He's given them the land. At the end of Joshua, they more or less have conquered the land that he gave them. So the promise is fulfilled in this beautiful, fitting conclusion to the whole passage. And that's what we got, guys. Starting next week, we'll have James Harris and then Scott Geyer and then Robert Chase to be bringing you some lessons. I thoroughly enjoyed this being able to teach this series. I've personally grown a lot from it, and I thank you for your encouragement that you've given. Thank you.